It's a real pleasure for me and a privilege both to welcome and to introduce our distinguished speaker, Robin Swann, leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and MLA for North Antrim since 2011. Born and bred in North Antrim, Mr. Swann was UUP Chief Whip between 2012 and 2017, and in the latter year took up the role of Ulster Unionist Party leader. Queen's University Belfast has made in recent years a strong commitment to being an arena for open public and political debate, and a vital part of that is bringing major political figures to the university to set out their ideas and to engage in constructive discussion. Robin, it's great to have you with us tonight here in Queen's University, and so pleased to speak to us tonight on the subject of unionism, not for sections or factions, but for all. Unionism, not for sections or factions, but for all. Please give a very warm welcome to Robin Swann.
Thank you. Richard Ryan, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, can I give a thanks to Queen's University for the invitation to speak here tonight? It's an honour to speak at one of Northern Ireland's most prestigious and steadfast institutions. The contribution of Queen's to life here has been immense, and it has rightly earned a global reputation for excellence. Undoubtedly, the presence of the university is a draw to Northern Ireland, not just for international students, but for potential investors. As a party, we've always had an active and vibrant Queen's Young Unionist Association, and I'm delighted that this continues to bring new talent into our party. Many of my party colleagues have found their feet at Queen's, not just as students, but many as lecturers. And one particularly weighs on my mind, especially as we approach the date marking 35 years since he was murdered, just yards from where I stand tonight. The murder of Edgar Graham chills me to the core. And we had some shared history. We both went to Ballymena Academy, and had his life not been brought to a callous end at just 29-year-old, in all likelihood, he, not I, would have been the second North Antrim man to lead the Ulster Unionist Party. I hope we never see another day like that. When a politician, a law lecturer, a human being is shot dead in cold blood by those motivated by sectarian hatred. I would like to take this opportunity this evening to talk about the future, and the future for unionism particularly, building on the thoughts that I outlined at my party's conference a couple of weeks ago. But I believe that to look forward, we must first reflect on where we have come from. Politics here is deeply broken. 20 years ago, we entered what was and should have continued to be a new era of hope for Northern Ireland. A number of months ago, I was present in the Whitla Hall as the 20th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement was marked. I sat amongst those who had played a key role in bringing that about, and their reflections then brought a challenge to how we have ended up where we are today. 20 years ago, like today, politics in Northern Ireland was deeply broken and society deeply divided. But the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP took a significant risk for the good of the people of Northern Ireland, because they knew that things needed to change, and that was worth the risk. The devolved institutions designed by the authors of the '98 Agreement offered something different. They offered partnership. Two communities doing it together, a complete step change, something that could set the tone. Instead of mayhem in the street, differences could be hashed out in a debating chamber. Two communities could be given the space to heal and grow, and in time the institutions could grow and evolve with them. But sadly that was not to be, because the Belfast Agreement was not allowed to grow and evolve with society as it was meant to. That is because there were those who had much to fear from the normalisation of politics here and the threat it posed to their relevance. The agreement was corrupted in 2007 at St Andrews by two parties who had played to the extremes and were indulged by two governments. They embedded division in our political system, and the race to the bottom that they have engaged in during the years since has led us to where we are today. Because as their arrogance grew, anyone who pointed out that things were spiralling out of control was met with scorn and verging on contempt. If we are to get back on track and restore an assembly and executive, then this has to be acknowledged. We cannot just pick up where we left off without lessons having been learned. If we do, we will quickly end up back in a mess worse than we find ourselves in now. But just because we have our own unique challenges here does not mean that anyone should be expected to accept a lesser form of democracy. This is not simply about resolving issues that certain parties view to be outstanding and then carrying on like nothing happened. We must return to the original intention of the Belfast Agreement, which was power sharing. Power sharing must be built on trust. It must be built on respect, and it must be built on fairness. Fairness in sharing space, sharing power, and sharing responsibility. If we do not truly examine how far away politics in Northern Ireland has moved from these principles and how we can renew our commitment to them, then we set ourselves back on a path towards inevitable failure. But all this is not just happening in isolation. While it seems that the current situation is just being accepted by the UK government, Northern Ireland is facing huge challenges. We are at the centre of one of the most politically turbulent times since the Second World War. With every day that passes, there are major decisions being made on the United Kingdom's future outside of the European Union, while the region which stands to be most affected by any negatives sees its democratic institutions stagnate. And the RHI's inquiry and its forensic deconstruction of what went so badly wrong with the scheme has laid bare the true fault lines at the heart of an executive run by two unelected cabals. All while their health service is under unrelenting pressure, with no minister in place to take vital strategic decisions to try and alleviate some of the burden. And it concerns me that the public reflect on this and lose all faith in devolved politics. Which is why we must see those major changes in how we do business before we get back to Stormont. The way the executive conducted itself must change, and that culture of paranoia must end. At our party conference, I said that all parties around the executive table must see their mandate respected, with agendas and papers delivered on times and answers to written questions being provided within a reasonable period, and minutes of meetings actually being recorded. And if that needed to be formalised, then so be it, because some of the behaviour in previous executives damaged trust, and that needs to be rebuilt. There must be new oversight for ministers and SPADs. Self-governance and sanction has proved not to be effective. If a colleague, assembly member or a member of the public believes a minister has stepped out of line, then they must have a course of recourse, just as is in place for an MLA. We have proposed that the Assembly Commissioner should be able to investigate alleged breaches of the Ministerial Pledge of Office and Code of Conduct. Those who are operating budgets of public money must be fully accountable. And we want to see special advisors made subject to the Northern Ireland Civil Service disciplinary process for any breach of the Code of Conduct. And we are supporting an independent review in the number, role, remit and salaries of all SPADs in comparison with their counterparts in the rest of the United Kingdom. But we must also see the reform of blockages in the Assembly too. The petition of concern must be reformed before any return to devolution, to prevent it from being used in any other way than how it was intended, and that was to protect minorities. We've put forward our ideas, such as changing the threshold to mean that a successful petition would require signatories from either 90% of a designation or 40% of the whole House. We're not saying it's a perfect solution, but we have to start somewhere. We will listen to any idea brought forward by other parties who are serious about reform. Because when we do come back to discussions about reforming the Assembly and the Executive, the public will be cynical, and perhaps rightly so. So they must be able to have confidence that any talks process is working towards real solutions and reform, not simply another fudge or stoppage. And I believe, as I said today, the Secretary of State needs to move on instigating talks. If she waits for a perfect time to hold a talks process, she could find herself waiting for a very long time. Just treading water until after Brexit will simply not do. Both she and the government have a duty to the citizens of Northern Ireland. Simply allowing this place to wither until they aren't so occupied about Brexit is not an option. But there also needs to be a willingness demonstrated by all parties that they really want this to work. The UK government must not be afraid to confront the DUP and Sinn Féin about their failures. And I've said it before, if it's a case that she truly does not think there is any prospect of restoring devolution in the near future, then she needs to end the charade. Appoint UK ministers and move to direct rule. Some parties might not be delighted, but there are people on hospital waiting lists who are crying out for someone to take a decision. I said at my party conference that unionism has been dragged into the gutter by the DUP. I hear that from unionists and non-unionists alike. And there's something about the tone of unionism that is being communicated nationally that they don't like. That has to change. After all we've been through, are we really content to let the union slide through our fingers because we could not resist being snide or obnoxious to our neighbours? Because I believe that unionism is a movement. It's not owned by one party or another. It is made up of all classes and religions and sexual orientations, liberals and conservatives, capitalists and socialists. It is complex, and it cannot be the case that one section tries to shape it to alienate others who have just as much to offer. And it is not somehow ununionist to call out others within unionism when you think they are in the wrong or are damaging the very thing they claim to cherish. I also said at my party conference that sectarianism, racism and homophobia are not tenets of unionism, and that anyone who thinks otherwise had no place in the Ulster Unionist Party. But it's not just a case of simply not being something. We must also be strong advocates for our minority communities. Early in the year, I established a number of working groups within the party to reach out to corners of society that we haven't been as engaged with as we should be, such as our black and minority ethnic communities, the women's sector, and churches and religious organisations. But an important piece of that engagement has been forging and building community relationships with the LGBT community. Often the relationship between this community and elements of political unionism has not been an easy one. But I want the Ulster Unionist Party to be a comfortable home for them, either as a member, an elected representative, or as a voter. I was honoured to be asked to speak at the Pink News summer reception in Parliament a few months ago. And during my speech, I reflected on the research that reported that 2 out of 3 of LGBTQ young people do not feel that school is the welcoming environment it should be. That 3 out of 5 said that they had experienced suicidal thoughts because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that 1 out of 4 had considered making a suicide attempt. Those aren't just statistics. Those are children in this country. Those are children in our schools. So instead of engaging in the political sham fights, we should be asking what we can do to urgently reverse these figures and reflecting on whether our words add to their burdens. Because unionism needs to be careful about its words. If any of us were to summarise the contributing factors to the current political stalemate, how much of that would be down to the words of others? It may feel good in the moment to say something that belittles another person or a community, but what does it do in the longer term? Does it win converts for the union, or does it push people further away? I am concerned that just as there are those within nationalism who seek to exploit Brexit in pursuit of their ultimate political goal, there are also those who proclaim to be unionists who are so focused on the exit from the European Union that they seem to have forgotten the risks this poses to your future as part of the most important union of all, if this is badly handled. And what does it do for Northern Ireland unionism on the national stage when we seem to be so hard-headed all the time? Because I'm fed up with the politics of bullying and ransom, because that's not my unionism. And my unionism is not just the rejection of another constitutional arrangement. I want people to look to unionism and not just see people who represent their constitutional aspiration, but people who are actually capable of providing good government for all. Because I know that good government serving a connected people will only strengthen our place in the United Kingdom. Political unionism must urgently demonstrate it is committed to truly building a post-sectarian society. It can no longer be enough to make a few nods towards it in government before riling up your base in the run-up to an election. I said at the beginning of my speech that to look forward, it is important to reflect first on where we've come from. There have been clear messages from leaders of unionism over the last 100 years that should have been heeded long before now. Such as Lord Londonderry, when he advocated for a single education system in the 1920s, a policy that anyone truly committed to ending sectarianism should throw their wholehearted support behind. Or Terence O'Neill, when he said that it is not just enough to be part of the United Kingdom, we want to be a progressive part of that kingdom. And I would recommend that unionists of all shades reflect on the words of Edward Carson in 1920 when he talked of good government, fair government, honest government, and a government not for sections or factions, but for all. To truly secure our place within the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland's second century and beyond, unionism must embrace the principle of being not for sections or factions, but for all. When the case is made for the union, I want it to be about more than just maintaining the status quo or coasting by on a current majority. I want it to be about where your jobs, your welfare, and your health care are most secure and accessible. I want it to be about making the case that the lives of all the citizens here are better as part of that nation, one that advances their cultural, emotional, and civic well-being. I want unionism to win hearts and minds. I want a unionism where even those who do not share our ultimate political aspiration, that they do not doubt our ambition to serve them just as well in government as those who do. But that will take work, both internally and externally. But I'm up for the challenge, and I know the Ulster Unionist Party is up for the challenge. But I hope others are too. Thank you.
Robin, thank you very much indeed for that stimulating talk, which has set out very powerful ideas, and I know there'll be questions and responses to that. Robin has kindly said that he'll answer questions from the audience, so who'll start us off? here at the front. Thank you very much. Microphone's coming around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was an excellent address and very clear, so thank you. And thank you for coming to Queen's. Can I ask a very difficult question? The first ones are always difficult, so I'll start off. Do you think Brexit will end the Union?
No. I think it has the potential to if handled badly. And that's where I come from some of the statements I've made and some of the public statements I've been castigated against about the damage I think the DUP is doing to the Union. Because there are those within the DUP whose pursuit of their pure Brexit does threaten tenets of the Union. And the portrayal of Northern Ireland, of unionism, at this minute in time Westminster is being damaged by that, where there is a small cohort within the Conservative Party would gladly see the back of this place. Because of the way the DUP is now portraying us, but also because they now see us as a difficulty in obtaining their pure Brexit. I also believe there's a small section in Westminster who would gladly see the back of Scotland to get their pure Brexit. And that's the difficulty I think that our Prime Minister at this minute in time hasn't overcome. But Brexit, if done right, and I hope that it will be done right, I think actually has a potential to strengthen the Union.
May I ask this?
Absolutely, yeah. We're giving the professor a microphone. It's a very dangerous situation.
I'm a political scientist, so I say, if you could extrapolate further that, if you look at the vote in Northern Ireland, and you look it down to demographics, younger people in Northern Ireland would have voted to stay in Brexit, or stay in Europe, more than where the older people were the ones that traditionally would have voted out. So if you take the argument further then, that may not happen now, but if Brexit was to happen, could there be a chance that there would be a growing swell of people who see that their option as being European, and that Brexit could then lead to a border poll because of that?
Well, I think in regards to the border poll, the conditions for a border poll are very clearly laid out within the Belfast Agreement, and it's within the power of the Secretary of State to deem when that border poll may come about. I am in a belief, and a strong belief for many unionists I've spoken to, many within our own party, of unionists who voted to remain in the EU, but they did not vote for Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom. So if the vote is remaining in the EU or remaining in the UK, there is a majority of unionism who will vote to stay within the United Kingdom over the EU. And I think that's where it is dangerous to draw those direct comparisons between the Remain vote and those who would support a border poll.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. There's a question at the back, right next to you, Morris. Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Hi, better cough first. Hi, Robin. Thanks very much. So earlier on in the year, it's very similar to what you said tonight. You said, I will not stand by and allow unionism become a byword for intolerance. And I think that's in keeping with the theme of your talk tonight. But then earlier on this year, you've also said that granting an Irish Language Act in any guise will open a Pandora's box. Do you not feel them too mutually exclusive to people like myself, not a member of any political party, but is even on very cancha Scialega Gourmet? So I'm an Irish speaker. I don't see how such sentiments are very tolerant of people such as myself and many others. I'd just like to hear your opinion on it.
Thank you.
No, and thank you for asking the question. It's one of those ones I had a good idea it would come. But it's something we've been asked continually about our party's position on the Irish Language Act. We don't see the need for additional Irish language legislation because of what was built into the 98 agreement. And that's the protection. When you look at the number of children, in 1998, 1,200 children were in Irish language education. That's now up to over 8,000. Didn't need an additional Irish Language Act. When you look at the protections and the promotions that are put into Irish language broadcasting and the money that's given there for Teenage E and the money's coming out of Westminster, doesn't need an Irish Language Act. What I think the Irish language actually needs is the ability to grow at its own pace. And that's why the Belfast Agreement, when we negotiated, when we took the hard decisions with the SDLP, that's why we created bodies like the Ulster Scots Agency and Forest na Gaeilge, to look after both languages and cultures and sections and remove them from politics. Because in 98, we knew then the dangers of politicising language and culture. And I think, unfortunately, that's where we've got to now. So I think it's actually now the challenge is to take the politics out of the language and take the politics out of the culture, so that the respect can be given to both sides to allow that natural progression to grow. We've had many engagements with Conor na Gaeilge and Belfast Forsha. You know, I was our party culture spokesperson for a long time. The Luifa grant that was put in place, the money, the 50,000 that was removed from a Gaeltag bursary was derisory, was disgraceful. Should never have happened, because that's what politicised a language. There was a fisheries boat was renamed. It was, I'll not even try, the Queen of Ulster. And it was the Irish translation for that. You could help me probably better than I would try to make an attempt at it. But the thing about it is, you see, when the DUP changed that fisheries protection boat's name, it became a political issue. I would say out of the 108 MLAs, there was probably 2 who ever knew that boat existed until the name was changed. So it was only by the politicisation of the Irish language that we've got into the difficult areas. So come back to my original statements, I don't see them as contradictory. I want to take the politics out of the language.
So do you regret using the term Pandora's box? Do you think that might be similar to someone calling it a crocodile?
No.
On reflection,
No,
do you think?
no.
On reflection, do you think it
I
might
think
be
that
disrespectful to someone wanting to get extra protection for Irish language to opening up Pandora's box? And do you think that maybe self-reflection in some aspect might actually gain you more respect from voters in some regards?
Put it this way, for anyone that knows me, I've probably self-reflection and probably too hard on myself at times, but when I look at the language and where that was in the context, it was to create an Irish language that lacked at that stage the political Pandora's box that it opened, I think is what brought us to the problems we are and where we are today. You know, I was quoted, the Irish Language Act is often quoted by Sinn Féin as something that's preventing the return to Stormont. I think even they have moved on from that now. I think it's about Brexit. So it was an unfortunate, the phraseology and the contempt I think that others shown to the Irish language politicised it to a point that it should never have been taken.
Thank you. There's a question at the back row again also, thank you. Thanks very much.
Would you ever consider changing the name of your party to be kind of more neutral?
Not my decision, thankfully. I've got no, I'll be quite honest with you, no, because within the party, and it's, you know, there's a rich culture and heritage within the name and the traditions of my party that I don't think a name change would sort. I think for the party become, I take it you mean more neutral by opening to Protestants and Catholics and those who non-subscribe to any religion. I think we do that by our policies and by our engagements, not by the title that we use. One of the things I said when I became leader of the party, that I didn't want to be put in a box as to how people would see me as a unionist coming from North Antrim, and nor do I want the party to be put in a box as to how other people perceive it to be or what they think it should be. So it's about challenging ourselves, and that's why I finished that. That's why I finished my contribution by saying those challenges have to be both internal and external, because something we are doing as a party at this minute in time is pushing boundaries and challenging ourselves internally the way we never have in the past, and it's the right thing to do, because it's the right thing to do for the people of Northern Ireland.
To the questioner, if Robin Swann had said that he was going to change the name, do you have a suggestion of what it should be called?
Not really, but I liked Basil Gray's NI21.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's a question here. I want the questioners to have a chance to question. Thanks. Graham.
You said that Brexit wouldn't break up the UK, at least you hope it wouldn't break up the UK, but I wonder about the future or the constitutional future of the UK. Would you support a federal UK?
I take it by your accent, I know where you're coming from, but the progression to a federal UK and that, you know, I've actually heard it raised mostly by Scottish Conservatives. Believe it or not, Murdo Fraser would be a big proponent for the federalisation of the United Kingdom. It would be a challenge as to where it would leave us on, I think, the worldwide stage. The United Kingdom, as we currently exist, we can operate as an integral part of the United Nations, NATO, all the rest of it. If we start to federalise and start to break down into the sections or factions that I spoke of earlier, I think we begin to lose some of our clout on the world stage. And once you get into federalisation, I would be concerned where Scotland goes in regards to the Scottish Nationalist Party, if they were ever to get the foothold, because I think federalisation could be a step to another referendum.
Thank you. Next question.
Can I ask you, it's been revealed that Fianna Fáil may be coming up north sooner rather than later. How do you think that would affect politics in Northern Ireland?
Thank you.
There's maybe a question for Colm rather than me, but Fianna Fáil's entry into the political arena in Northern Ireland, I think, will actually be damaging for the SNLP. In either way, if they come in as a partner and try to work along with them, I think it will have a detrimental effect onto the internal workings. If Fianna Fáil establish themselves in Northern Ireland, I think it will also have a more detrimental effect on the SDLP than it will in Sinn Féin. The increase of another all-island party, I think, makes it more difficult for the Irish government to be seen as an honest broker in any talks processes. It's the same challenge that we have at this minute in time with the Conservative Party and their confidence and supply agreement with the DUP. There is a challenge to the perception that the Secretary of State is no longer the neutral arbitrator that she should be perceived to be.
I mean, Robin, you mentioned when you were talking about the politics of the past 20 years that, in your view, the governments in their politics around the St Andrews Agreement really helped to degrade the process that had been developed, or degrade the possibility. Do you have any sense, looking at the politics of the governments in Dublin and London at the moment, that there's an appetite for them to become involved in reimagining the politics of the post-Good Friday deal in the way that is in line with your kind of arguments?
I suppose my argument, and our argument, isn't about reimagining the agreement. It's actually come back to it. And I think that's the challenge for both governments, to be able to move away from the aberration that they caused at St Andrews. One of the key aims, and I mentioned about the challenges that ourselves and the SDLP took. One of the big things, and the conversation, before we come in, and we were having Northern Ireland and the symbolism of two communities working together was a big step change for '98. So when the Good Friday Belfast Agreement had the election of First and Deputy First Minister by the majority of the Assembly, it meant it was a joint ticket and it had to be supported by both communities. And St Andrews changed that to the fact that the First Minister now comes from the largest party of the largest designation, and the Deputy First Minister comes from the largest party of the second designation. Means every election, and we've seen that, every election we've fought isn't about policy and education, isn't about bread and butter issues, isn't about how we're going to progress Northern Ireland. It's about, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get them. And that is back to pre-98. 98 had the ability to change, and we were starting to see that. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty in some of the things that we had to do, but St Andrews reversed that partnership model that Northern Ireland should be about, and it's the only way we succeed is by the recognition of the two communities, and none actually that we have to work together because we live in the same place.
And at the event to which you referred, which we held here at Queen's in April, marking the 20th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, one of the things that I thought was striking about getting some of those people back together was a reminder of some of the hope that there had been in 1998, that this was a new set of possibilities and relationships. Are you confident, as the leader of one of the main parties in Northern Ireland, that that hope can be recaptured to reclaim the spirit of that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm portrayed as the optimist among the five party leaders, so that's not a good that's not a good place to start from. But I suppose, look, this morning, and I'm sure anybody in the room has heard the news portrayed. What we had this morning in regards to the potential of another talks process took the heart out of me. It was one of the most demoralising meetings I've had since I entered politics. I still think and I still hope that we have the ability within our political classes to move the talks process to the next step. But I think there's the challenge of, wider society to actually challenge the political parties if they're serious about making this place work. And I think that's why when I got the offer to come here tonight to engage, we need the voices of Northern Ireland to put the challenge to our two large parties. When we engage with the stakeholders, should it be the FSPs, the CBIs, the Ulster Farmers Union, the blame for us not having a government at this minute in time is Stormont's fault. If we were in any other democratic society, they would be pointing the finger at one party, or one Prime Minister, or one President, whereas here we still haven't got that challenge from civic community or civic society to put the focus onto those two parties that, in our opinion, are causing the blockage in restoration. So until that civic engagement starts to, I suppose, stamp their feet and make their voice heard, it's easy for some political parties to sit back and take the foot off the pedal.
Thank you. There's a question at the back there, thank you. Thanks very much.
I think one of the frustrations that people in this country feel is that they don't really know what's been going on. We've had no government for almost coming up for 2 years now, and every now and again a bunch of people like yourself appear at the bottom of the steps at Stormont, slag off the other parties, but don't really tell us what's going on. So could you tell us why today's meeting was really demoralising, and also do you think the talk should be held in public?
Well, today's meeting was demoralising because it's the first one we've had since February. And when you say, you don't know what's going on, I could equally say that I don't know what's going on because I don't know if there is anything going on. And when we saw the engagement, I think this morning between the two larger parties, it's obvious there is no interaction. There's no backroom challenge between the two of them. Should talks be held in public? Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. I think that was part of the failure of the last talks processes. Because when there's that need of a talks process, anywhere we hold it in North, should have been Stormont House, should have been Stormont Castle, should have been in Stormont. When you come out of a talks process, it may not have been easy. You should even come back to Haas in the Stormont Hotel. When you get into a negotiation that's not pretty or not conducive or going some way, and you walk out the door and there's a flanks of cameras and microphones looking for the soundbite. Doesn't matter how, if you say you'd had the 95% positive meeting, once you get the negative soundbite, that's the bit that carries. So for a talks process to work, it may not be democratic. I think we need to go back to the way it was. Talks processes should be boring. They should not be interesting. When I was talking, about the change in how we put forward a change, a petition of concern, I'll be honest with you, I could see your eyes glaze over because, sometimes it makes my eyes glaze over. But that's the nitty-gritty that we actually need to be discussing at this minute in time. So I think a quiet talks process a way out of the road, but something that involves all the parties. It can't just go back to being the two parties dividing the thing out between themselves and expecting us and the SDLP or even the Alliance Party to roll in behind them because they've got the large mandates and we should do what we're told. I think something that's become apparent. I think the DUP no longer will think that we're a party that can be relied on to roll in behind them just because they shout they're unionists and we're not.
Thank you. There's a question here at the front, please. Thanks, Haley. Thank you very much.
I'm a bit greedy. I have two questions.
You can have two.
The first one is, I'm from Balmoney in your constituency, and I was wondering, how do you change the heartland of unionism to vote UUP again? From the DUP, how do you take away the politics of fear that's there? Because My grandmother would not come with me to sign the petition of concern for Ian Paisley, so I had to go myself. Found my neighbour, then he told my grandmother and my father, and we all had a whole huge argument at the family table about unionism. How do you change that culture? 2, would you, if there was a United Ireland, would you stay and would you lead? And would you stay for the community, or would you leave like Arlene Foster would?
Thank you. Two
Well,
great questions.
Look, I'll take them in reverse because the segment's easier. I'm going nowhere. This is my home, my family's here, my roots are here, but, it's a hypothetical question because there'll never be a United Ireland. So, but on the first one, that challenge of fear goes back, it's instilled because of St Andrews. It's that fear, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get them. How we challenge that is by Ulster Unionists working and articulating the message that we're trying to get across, that there is a unionism that's better than what is being offered by the DUP. North Antrim, I was written off 2000. Every political pundit wrote me off at the last election when we dropped to 5. I'm the only unionist that had quota. I don't know why, but the challenge is there. I think there's a hope in unionism that things can change. Unfortunately, it's a hard push, and it takes us doing it every day, every step, and in every individual we meet, that this place can be better than what it's being portrayed to be, and that's the big challenge. It's how we are being portrayed at this minute in time, and how unionism is being portrayed, that we have to reverse. Okay.
Thank you. The question here, thank you very much.
Mine's a fairly short and sweet question, and it's based on a conversation that I've had numerous times with different colleagues, and it's whether or not you think an election, a new election to the Stormont Assembly, would actually break the deadlock that is existing currently.
Thank you.
No. It may change numbers slightly, but it won't change the problems. And I don't think an election solves anything at this minute in time. It'll not change the dynamic of the leaderships of the two parties. It'll not change the mindset of the two unelected cabals that are managing some of the MLAs. One of the unfortunate things I think we have now, between where we are now and where we were 20 years ago, I see professional politicians in both the DUP and Sinn Féin who don't have the life experience of what their counterparts would have had in '98, nor do they have the relationships with each other on the other side of the house that their counterparts would have had in '98. So when you go back to the people who were there in '98, yes, they were political opponents, but they'd served in council together. They'd been on tourism junkets to Meath, the Somme, so they knew each other. We now, I believe, have two cohorts in either party that don't know each other. We possibly have two cohorts in either parties that have never spoke to somebody from the other side or engaged with somebody from the other side. So an election doesn't change that relationship. And that's some of the things I was talking about earlier on, is that building up of trust and knowledge of each other and what that means that we need to be doing now. There's a big challenge about engagement and how politics actually interacts with each other now in Northern Ireland. We've got to a place that we're so far apart, it's going to take very small steps to bring us back into the middle.
And do you think there are particular things, Robin, that could be done even with the deadlock there is in institutional politics, which could help to build some of those relationships? Because in the 1990s, the personal relationships that developed were crucial to establishing the political change.
Well, you don't have to like somebody to work with them. And I think that's the realisation that there was in '98, but people got to know each other. At this minute in time, there is no avenue to know each other. And look, I suppose I'll be blunt, and I've been round some of the other, when you look at the Dáil, when you look at the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Assembly, Westminster, they've all one thing in common that Stormont doesn't have. They're both so far away from a lot of the elected politicians' houses, they stay, and they stay overnight. And they drink in bars together. And they have, maybe not a social life together, but they have a social interaction together. So they get to know each other. They get to talk about football. They get to talk about fishing. They get to talk about the weekend. Politics and politicians in Northern Ireland don't have that opportunity to get to know each other for the social interaction.
And those relationships can be crucial to politics.
Politics is built in relationships, and it's the relationships between politicians, the relationships between politicians and civil servants, the relationships between politicians and the general public are all crucial. So it's about rebuilding that trust among communities and among politicians. It's a big challenge, and I don't think there's an easy answer. And as I said before, I think we're now back to a stage where it's small steps.
Okay. Thank you. There's another question at the back. Thank you. Yep.
Oh, thank you for the second bite. Just leading on from what you said there, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think an election would change anything. But looking forward to May next year, if we haven't got an assembly up and running by next May, how do you think the lack of an assembly and the lack of a further election will affect the way the local elections are conducted? Are they likely to be used as a kind of cipher for a Stormont election? And will the issues be Northern Ireland general rather than local bogs and drains issues?
Thank you.
Unfortunately, yes. I think if the Assembly isn't up and running or there's some shape by next May, we will see a polarisation come into our local government elections that we've never had before. It's one of the fortunate elected assemblies that we still have in Northern Ireland as in regard to our councils, that we were still able to take that or keep that them and us voting mentality out of. If we don't have the maturation or something working towards it in Assembly, the worst thing we could see a Brexit rerun for our local Assembly next year, depending on where talks are, what way things are working. But our local government and our councillors have worked because they are on the ground, they're dealing with the bread and butter issues. What unfortunately I see now coming into a lot of our council chambers are the debates that they should be having had in the Assembly. And national politics and national problems are now being brought down into a council level. So you see council meetings now being taken up by issues that shouldn't be anywhere near them. Issues that they don't have competence in. But you spend 3/4 of an hour debating should they write a letter to the British and the Irish government, or just the British government, or a letter that may raise a concern but won't solve a problem. So I would hope that in May we still rely on local government elections to elect councillors who can look after the bins and the bugs and the burials as what they should be doing.
Thank you. There's a question at the back left there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. You've made a number of references to Brexit and the need for it to be managed and that to be done properly. I'd be interested in knowing your position on the backstop. At the moment, a UK-EU deal to avoid a no-deal Brexit is contingent on the UK accepting a backstop, which could see checks on goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Could. Okay. If you were asked by either the Prime Minister or the DUP for your opinion on whether the UK should take the no-deal option or the deal with the potential for controls in the Irish Sea, what would your advice be?
Well, I would advise, and I have advised the Prime Minister to go for the deal. The backstop only becomes necessary when we don't have the deal. A no-deal Brexit is as damaging to Northern Ireland as damaging to Northern Ireland. The problem is, I think we're actually getting tied up in the backstop, and the backstop to the backstop, and a hybrid backstop, because I think the negotiations are pretty far advanced. I was out in Brussels with Jim Nicholson, our MEP, a couple of weeks ago, and we were engaging with the UK ambassador, the Irish ambassador, and the different political groupings within the European Parliament, and that's where you get to know what is going on politically. I think the 21st of November is a significant date, and I don't think it's by accident that Dominic Raab, he maybe mentioned it by accident, but I think it's there for a reason. The backstop as currently stands I think, is actually more dangerous to us than a lot of people actually imagine. The checks between goods going back and forth, the hybrid backstop, when it talked about, I thought, the Irish government thought it would keep us happy if there was no checks between Northern Ireland and GB, because that met what the DUP was actually asking for. The danger to us was then the checks coming from GB to Northern Ireland. For our just-in-time manufacturers, anything that delayed a small part coming from GB into Northern Ireland affected their production and manufacturing lines. Anything that needed to check coming from GB into Northern Ireland supermarkets affected the timing of getting stuff onto shelves. So the backstop actually is quite a, I think it's a danger to the union, because it does bring about that border in the Irish Sea that we talk about, and it also brought about, the alignment of regulations, Northern Ireland regulations to the EU. That's fine. We would see no difference today, tomorrow, 5 years' time. But as GB started to change its regulations and we were still maintaining EU regulations, when the great trade deal that GB was able to have, Northern Ireland could or would be excluded, because the EU wouldn't be negotiating trade deals for us.
Thank you. I'm going to abuse the position of chair by asking the final question, and I'm going to return to something that you movingly mentioned at the start, which was the murder of Edgar Graham here in Queens in 1983. You mentioned words and symbolism and the importance of those gestures in building trust and relationships. We recently had Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin here to speak, and that too was a very valuable occasion. And Edgar Graham's sister attended and asked a question powerfully about her brother and his murder. Looking at gestures and responses and so on, what could Michelle O'Neill, as a leading Sinn Féin politician, have said which would be consistent with Sinn Féin politics, which would contribute towards some sense that words and symbols were being built which would have some kind of reconciliatory effect?
And Richard, I think you've maybe answered that enigma in your own question. Consistent with Sinn Féin politics, I don't see a reconciliation or an approach coming from Sinn Féin that would be currently consistent with Sinn Féin politics. When you look, I know it was on social media the other night. They've now produced an apron to go with Gerry Adams' cookbook, which has bandoliers and bullets on it. So that is not about reconciliation to the unionist people. But I don't want to take away from Anne or what she said. I think Anne handled herself, I think, in a mature way that actually done her and Edgar credit that night. Okay. And I would rather leave it, because I don't see the politic. I don't see Sinn Féin's current political agenda allowing them to do what may be needed to be done.
Okay. Thank you. We've had a compelling lecture and terrific questions and discussion. So in closing, 3 brief words of thanks. Thanks very much to you in the audience for turning up and for the great questions and discussion. I hope you'll come to many of the things that we host at Queen's. It's wonderful to see people here engaging in this kind of serious-minded discussion of major issues. Thanks to Ryan Feeney and the public engagement team for, as ever, putting this together so well. It's a wonderful part of what Queen's contributes, I think, to life in Northern Ireland, and thank you to the team for that. But particularly for a powerful evening, a great lecture and great discussion. Please join me in thanking our speaker tonight, Robin Swann.